From a small island nation to the ruler of a quarter of the world, the British Empire shaped continents, cultures, and history itself. Its rise, its conquests, and its fall are a story of ambition, power, and enduring legacy. In the span of centuries, England transformed from a cluster of kingdoms into a global empire. Across oceans and continents, British explorers, traders, and rulers left their mark, sometimes through innovation and commerce, other times through conflict and conquest. This is the story of how the empire rose, dominated the world, faced its greatest challenges, and left a legacy that still echoes today. Chapter 1. From Island to Empire. The Age of Exploration. England, once a cluster of small kingdoms on a misty island in the North Sea, had ambitions far greater than its modest shores suggested. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the spirit of exploration had begun to sweep across Europe. Spain and Portugal had already claimed vast territories in the Americas and Africa, and England, eager not to be left behind, looked to the seas for opportunity. The tiny island nation, lacking the population or wealth of its continental neighbors, turned to naval power as its path to prominence. The age of exploration in England was marked by daring voyages into uncharted waters. Mariners like John Cabot, sailing under the English flag in 1497, reached the coasts of Newfoundland, claiming distant lands and opening the first tentative links with the New World. These expeditions were not merely about discovery. They were about trade, influence, and the promise of wealth that could elevate England's status on the world stage. Soon, English ships were charting the waters of Africa, India, and the Caribbean, seeking spices, silks, and precious metals. It was during this period that the East India Company was born, in 1600. Chartered by Queen Elizabeth I, the company was granted a monopoly on trade with the East Indies, though it eventually focused its efforts on India. This single commercial enterprise became a cornerstone of England's rise to global power. Private merchants, backed by royal authority, were now able to establish trading posts, negotiate with local rulers, and even raise armies to protect their interests. The seeds of empire were sown not through conquest alone, but through commerce, diplomacy, and the strategic use of naval power. Exploration also brought England into conflict with its European rivals. Spain and Portugal, already established in the Americas and Asia, saw England's ventures as a direct challenge. France and the Netherlands, too, were expanding their own maritime empires, and the seas became a theater of competition, privateering, and occasional warfare. Each voyage was a high-stakes gamble. Crews faced storms, disease, and navigational uncertainty, yet the potential rewards were immense. Success meant not only wealth, but prestige and a step closer to global influence. By the mid-17th century, England had established a network of colonies and trading posts stretching from the Caribbean islands to the Indian subcontinent. Though still a small player compared to Spain or Portugal, England's strategic positioning, combined with its growing naval capabilities, laid the foundation for what would become the British Empire. The island that once seemed isolated and insignificant had begun to extend its reach across oceans, driven by ambition, commerce, and the restless energy of explorers willing to risk everything for a chance at fortune and glory. In this first chapter of the empire's story, we see the transformation of England from a peripheral island kingdom into a maritime power. The age of exploration was not just a prelude to empire, It was the crucible in which England's global ambitions were forged. What began as a series of daring voyages would, over the coming centuries, grow into one of the largest and most influential empires the world had ever known. Chapter 2: Trade, Conquest, and Rivalries. By the 17th century, England's maritime ambitions had shifted from exploration to expansion, trade, and increasingly, confrontation. The small island kingdom that had once sent explorers like John Cabot across the Atlantic now sought to secure wealth, influence, and territory on a scale that would challenge Europe's established powers. Spain and Portugal, with their sprawling American colonies, had set a standard for empire, while France and the Netherlands were rapidly building their own global networks. For England, success would require not only daring voyages, but a combination of commerce, diplomacy, and military strategy. Trade became the lifeblood of England's rise. Merchants and companies, backed by royal charters, established outposts in strategic locations around the globe. The East India Company, founded in 1600, became the crown jewel of English commerce in the East. It was no longer just a trading entity. It wielded political and military power, negotiating with Indian rulers, maintaining private armies, and establishing fortified posts in key coastal cities. In the Caribbean, English plantations grew sugar, tobacco, and other lucrative commodities, fueling the economy back home and drawing England further into the transatlantic trade networks that connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. But trade alone was not enough. Expansion inevitably brought conflict. The seas became arenas of rivalry, where English ships faced off against Dutch and French fleets, and privateers launched daring raids on enemy ports. Each encounter was a test of skill, strategy, and courage. On land, competition for colonies sometimes led to open warfare, with forts captured and recaptured, and local alliances shifting with every treaty. In India, English traders had to navigate a complex landscape of regional kingdoms and competing European powers, using diplomacy as deftly as they wielded their muskets. Rivalries were not limited to foreign nations. Within England, merchants, investors, and the crown often clashed over control of resources, trade routes, and colonies. These internal conflicts shaped the policies and priorities of expansion, ensuring that the empire grew not only in territory, but in sophistication. Every victory at sea or colony gained was the result of careful planning, risk-taking, and an understanding that global influence required both force and finesse. By the late 17th century, England had carved out a network of colonies, trading posts, and naval bases stretching from the Americas to Africa and the Indian subcontinent. The foundations of a global empire were in place, but the journey had been far from smooth. Every conquest brought wealth and prestige, but also challenges and rivalries that would define the empire for centuries to come. England's success was measured not merely by the lands it claimed, but by its ability to navigate a complex web of competition against both foreign powers and its own ambitious citizens. This chapter of the empire's story shows how trade, conquest, and rivalry were intertwined. The pursuit of wealth led to military encounters, the need for security influenced diplomacy, and the ambition of individuals drove the nation toward global dominance. England was no longer just an island kingdom. It was a rising power, testing its strength against the world, and laying the groundwork for an empire that would eventually stretch across continents, oceans, and centuries. Chapter 3: The Victorian Zenith: Power Across Continents. By the 19th century, the British Empire had evolved from a maritime trading power into a global hegemon. The reign of Queen Victoria, beginning in 1837, symbolized an era of unprecedented expansion, wealth, and influence. England was no longer just an island nation. It had become the center of a world-spanning network of colonies, protectorates, and trade routes stretching from the Americas and Africa to the vast subcontinent of India and the distant lands of Australia and New Zealand. This was the Victorian zenith, the empire at its most powerful, at its most ambitious. Industrialization fueled this dominance. The steam engine, mechanized factories, and railways transformed Britain into the workshop of the world, producing goods on a scale unimaginable a century earlier. These products, in turn, found eager markets across the globe, binding colonies and trading partners into a tightly connected imperial economy. The British Navy, larger and more advanced than any other, ensured control of sea routes, safeguarding both commerce and political influence. London had become the financial heart of the world, and the pound sterling the currency of global trade. Colonial administration grew increasingly sophisticated. In India, the British Raj governed millions through a combination of bureaucracy, local alliances, and military presence. Railways and telegraphs connected distant regions, enabling rapid communication and control. Africa saw the establishment of protectorates and colonies as explorers mapped the continent and imperial officials negotiated treaties with local rulers. Meanwhile, the Caribbean, though economically less central than earlier, remained strategically important for shipping and trade. Across continents, the British flag symbolized authority, trade, and cultural influence. Yet this period was not without conflict. The empire's expansion often collided with indigenous populations, rival European powers, and even its own people. The Crimean War, conflicts in India such as the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny, and frontier skirmishes in Africa reminded Britain that imperial dominance required vigilance and sometimes bloodshed. Diplomacy, military force, and economic leverage worked hand in hand, reflecting an empire that was as much about strategy as it was about conquest. Cultural influence spread alongside political and economic power. English language, education systems, legal frameworks, and scientific advancements were carried to the farthest reaches of the globe. Missionaries, teachers, and administrators often followed traders and soldiers, leaving a lasting imprint on societies and cultures across continents. Britain's dominance was not solely military or economic. It was also intellectual and cultural, shaping the modern world in subtle but profound ways. By the late 19th century, the phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," captured the astonishing reach of this global power. From bustling cities in India to remote outposts in Africa and distant islands in the Pacific, British influence was ubiquitous. The Victorian zenith was a period of confidence, innovation, and control, marking the empire's peak. Yet beneath the surface, tensions, resistance, and rivalries hinted at challenges to come, foreshadowing the slow decline that would unfold over the 20th century. This chapter reveals how wealth, industry, and strategy combined to elevate Britain into a global superpower, shaping continents and peoples in ways that still echo today. The empire had reached its height, a colossal network of power, trade, and culture spanning the globe. Chapter 4. Wars that shaped the empire. No empire, no matter how vast, can expand or endure without facing conflict. For the British Empire, wars were both a tool of growth and a test of survival. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Britain's global dominance was challenged not only by rival European powers, but also by the resistance of the very peoples it sought to govern. These wars, over land, trade, and influence, would leave an indelible mark on the empire and shape its trajectory for decades to come. The Boer Wars in South Africa, fought between 1880 and 1902, exemplified the complexities of colonial conflict. British forces faced determined resistance from the Dutch-descended Boer settlers, who were fighting to maintain control over their own republics. Though ultimately victorious, Britain paid a heavy price in lives, resources, and international reputation. These wars exposed the limits of imperial power and revealed that technological superiority alone could not guarantee easy victories against resolute opponents. Conflict in India had an even more profound impact. The 1857 Sepoy Rebellion, often called the First War of Indian Independence, shook the foundations of British rule. What began as a mutiny by Indian soldiers in the East India Company's army quickly escalated into a widespread uprising across northern and central India. The rebellion revealed the deep tensions caused by colonial policies, cultural misunderstandings, and resentment of foreign domination. Its suppression led to the formal establishment of the British Raj in 1858, placing India under direct crown control and marking a turning point in colonial governance. On a broader scale, Britain's involvement in World War I demonstrated the global reach and vulnerabilities of the empire. Soldiers from India, Africa, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand fought in Europe and the Middle East, highlighting both the strength and the cost of imperial networks. The war drained Britain's financial and human resources and sowed the seeds for future independence movements, as colonial subjects demanded recognition and reform in exchange for their sacrifices. Even smaller skirmishes and frontier wars across Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia reinforced the lessons that would shape imperial policy. Britain's strategy combined diplomacy, military force, and economic leverage, balancing local resistance with European rivalries. These conflicts underscored the paradox of empire. While war enabled expansion and consolidation, it also revealed the fragility and complexity of maintaining authority across distant lands. Through these wars, Britain honed its military, political, and administrative capabilities. They shaped not only the empire's boundaries, but also its identity, culture, and approach to governance. The victories, defeats, and compromises of these conflicts left lasting impressions on both the colonizers and the colonized, influencing global politics, trade, and social structures for generations. This chapter of the empire's story shows that wars were far more than battles. They were defining moments. They tested the empire's resilience, exposed its vulnerabilities, and set the stage for the eventual challenges of the 20th century. The British Empire, though vast and powerful, was constantly shaped, reshaped, and sometimes threatened by the very conflicts that helped it grow. Chapter 5. The Twilight of Empire. Decolonization. The 20th century brought challenges that no amount of wealth, military strength, or political maneuvering could fully contain. The British Empire, once the world's unrivaled superpower, faced forces of change that would transform it irrevocably. World War II, with its unprecedented scale and devastation, marked the beginning of the empire's twilight. Britain emerged victorious, but weakened, economically drained, politically strained, and unable to maintain the sprawling network of colonies that had defined its global presence. The war also ignited aspirations for independence across the colonies. Soldiers from India, Africa, and the Caribbean had fought and sacrificed alongside British troops, and they returned home with heightened expectations of freedom, equality, and self-determination. Nationalist movements, long simmering under the surface, gained momentum. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru in India, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and other figures across Asia and Africa galvanized their people, advocating for independence through protests, diplomacy, and sometimes armed struggle. India became the first major jewel to slip from Britain's crown. After decades of struggle, negotiation, and civil disobedience, India achieved independence in 1947, leading to the partition into India and Pakistan, a process marked by both triumph and tragedy. The British government realized that even loyal colonies could no longer be held indefinitely against the tide of nationalism. Across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, similar movements began to challenge imperial authority, accelerating the process of decolonization. The Suez Crisis of 1956 symbolized the empire's waning global dominance. Britain, in alliance with France and Israel, attempted to seize control of the Suez Canal after Egypt nationalized it. The operation, intended to reassert imperial influence, backfired politically. Pressure from the United States, the Soviet Union, and the international community forced Britain to withdraw, exposing the limits of its power in a post-war world. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, colonies across Africa gained independence in rapid succession. Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and many others transitioned from British rule to self-governance. The process was often complicated, requiring negotiations, constitutional reforms, and sometimes conflict, but it was unstoppable. The empire, once a network of global control, was transforming into a collection of sovereign nations, connected not by domination, but by trade, language, and shared history. By the late 20th century, the British Empire, as it had been known, no longer existed. Yet its legacy persisted through the Commonwealth of Nations, an association of former colonies maintaining cultural, economic, and political ties. The era of direct imperial control had ended, replaced by influence through diplomacy, trade, and soft power. This chapter shows that decolonization was not merely the decline of an empire, it was the rise of new nations, the assertion of identity, and a reshaping of global order. The twilight of Britain's imperial era was as transformative as its zenith, marking the transition from dominance to partnership and setting the stage for the modern geopolitical landscape. Chapter 6: Legacy and Influence. The Empire. Today, though the British Empire has long ceased to exist as a political entity, its impact is woven into the fabric of the modern world. The colonies that once stretched from India to the Caribbean, from Africa to the Pacific, have become sovereign nations. Yet traces of British influence remain deeply embedded in their languages, legal systems, education, and governance. English has become a global lingua franca, used in diplomacy, commerce, science, and popular culture. British law, parliamentary systems, and administrative structures continue to shape the way countries operate, providing a framework for governance long after formal imperial rule ended. The Commonwealth of Nations embodies this enduring connection. Comprising over 50 member states, the Commonwealth maintains cultural, economic, and political ties among former colonies in Britain. While membership carries no legal obligations, it fosters cooperation in trade, education, sports, and diplomacy, reflecting a shared heritage and collective identity. London remains a hub for global finance and culture, and the British monarchy continues to play a symbolic role, connecting millions of people worldwide through history and tradition. Cultural influence also persists in literature, media, and education. English literature, theater, and media have shaped storytelling across continents. Institutions like Cambridge and Oxford have educated generations of leaders from former colonies, creating networks that span the globe. Science, technology, and industrial innovation, once exported during the empire's expansion, have left enduring legacies in infrastructure, urban planning, and research institutions. Yet, the legacy of the empire is complex and often contested. The expansion of British power involved conquest, exploitation, and displacement. Colonial policies reshaped economies, cultures, and societies in ways that were not always beneficial or fair. Debates over reparations, historical interpretation, and the memory of imperial rule continue to spark discussion in former colonies and in Britain itself. Recognizing these complexities is essential to understanding the full impact of the empire. In global politics, Britain remains influential through diplomacy, trade, and soft power, despite no longer commanding an empire. Former colonies often maintain strong economic and political relationships with Britain, while the English language and cultural practices continue to facilitate global communication and cooperation. The empire's history serves both as a cautionary tale and as a source of innovation and interconnectedness, shaping the world in profound and lasting ways. This final chapter underscores that while the British Empire may have disappeared from the world map, its echoes persist. The institutions, languages, and ideas it left behind continue to influence societies and nations around the globe. Understanding this legacy is crucial to grasping the contours of the modern world, revealing how one small island nation once commanded oceans, connected continents, and left an indelible mark on history. If you enjoyed uncovering the rise, power, and legacy of the British Empire, there's so much more history waiting for you. From lost civilizations to forgotten kings, from epic wars to mysterious empires, MidNight Empire brings the past to life, one story at a time. Subscribe now and join us on this journey through time. Hit the bell so you never miss a tale of intrigue, conquest, and the secrets history has kept hidden for centuries.